Welcome back to the Big Cloud, Big Data, Security and Privacy track of the Tech Summit of Webit.Festival Europe. He is responsible for an ecosystem of software, devices, and protocols that moves between 15 and 30% of the world's internet traffic on a daily basis and has more than 170 million monthly users worldwide. Welcome to the stage, my long-term friend, Mr. Eric Klinker, the President and Chief Executive Officer at BitTorrent. Eric, back on stage.
I don't know how many people have said this, but that has to be the coolest entry I've ever made onto a stage. It's great to be with you here. I think it's still in the morning. And maybe perhaps because of the party last night, we should get our brains going with pop quiz. So group participation, we'll start with some really easy questions, and then maybe we'll amp it up a bit. So let's start with an easy one. How many of you have heard of BitTorrent? Yeah, I mean, you just heard of it, so that should be everybody. How many of you have heard of another product we make called uTorrent? Okay, keep your hands up. How many of those hands have ever used uTorrent? Okay, good. So now I think the questions get a little harder. All right, keep your hands up, uTorrent users, because this one's for you. How many of you have ever used uTorrent to engage in one or more of the following activities? And it's a rule in Bulgaria, you have to be honest, okay? So this is what I'm told anyway. How many of you have used uTorrent to flash upgrade 15,000 web servers simultaneously in less than 15 seconds? Nobody, okay? How many of you have ever, as part of your job, used uTorrent to move big data to or from 1,000 remote locations or fast food restaurants? Nobody? Okay, I got one. How many of you have used uTorrent to help diagnose and cure cervical cancer in emerging markets using nothing more than a cell phone camera, uTorrent, and whatever local connectivity the emerging market telco has to offer, which isn't much? Nobody. Okay. All right, well, I did warn you that this quiz was hard. We started easy, got a little harder, but how many of you know that BitTorrent Inc. builds products for startups, for enterprises, for IT, for businesses, to solve all of those problems and more, and we actually have customers doing every one of those activities and more? Raise your hand. Anybody? Okay, so you see part of the challenge, I think, with marketing BitTorrent, because it really is a bit of the problem. I could be up here and I could be talking about almost anything. I could be talking about exciting topics like the media industry, or I could be talking about copyright law. Maybe that one's not so interesting. I could talk about very passionate subjects like the value of an open internet or the value of network neutrality. But I'm in the big data track, and I can't really talk about any of those things. But I can talk about the one thing that has empowered entrepreneurs the world over to create so much value and actually change the world. It's not terribly exciting, but it is the underlying technology that has made all those other stories possible, has made the BitTorrent story possible, has made your story possible. And if you think about where the internet is going next, it is unfortunately technology that will be called upon once again to help address some very clear challenges we see coming at us. And not just the challenge of the most boring title of a presentation. That is my obligation as being part of the tech track. That has to be done, I'm sorry. But it is also something that I endeavor to do to help you understand just how important this technology will be to solve some of these big problems going forward. And it starts with the driving force behind all of the internet and digital transformation that we're all seeing today, and that is Moore's Law. And Moore's Law stipulates, of course, that the devices that I connect to the internet will exponentially expand in capability over time. And that's great. That has made a lot of things possible. But the problem is that the things that make the internet itself, these workers are laying a cable across a desert in China. These things don't obey Moore's Law. They refuse to obey Moore's Law. And even if I replace shovels in China with backhoes in Manhattan, that same backhoe isn't going to trench twice as fast next year. It's going to do about the same amount of work. And that creates a bit of a challenge. It actually creates something of a digital divide, not the one that you think you know about, where rich countries and poor countries, although I have to admit Bulgaria has outstanding internet. My God, I wish I lived here compared to what I get at home. But well, put that aside, this is a different kind of digital divide. And it is the divide of the devices that I connect to the internet rapidly outpacing what the underlying internet can deliver. And that puts a premium on efficient network utilization, a very rich premium that is only going to get bigger over time. Because if you think about the flip phone that I had just a few years ago and the amount of data that thing could generate compared to this like UHD shooting smartphone I've got in my pocket, that phone could probably create more digital content than the entire content industry could have produced in, say, like the early 90s. That's an incredible amount of capability that each and every one of us has in our pocket. That's made possible by Moore's Law. And if you're wondering why, if exponential growth in data is being represented by my graphic designer as a linear line, maybe it's a logarithmic scale would be maybe my guess. But that challenge would probably be addressable if that were the only thing we were dealing with. But unfortunately, it's being compounded by another force, an even bigger one, and that's the IoT era. And that era is coming. And that means that we're going to be seeing not just an exponential expansion in the capability of every device on the internet, but an exponential expansion in the number of devices on the internet. And you put these two together, and you begin to appreciate the kind of tsunami that is about to hit the internet. And it will be transformational. And the internet itself will need to transform as well. We don't have the means today, or at least not the way the internet currently operates, to solve these kinds of problems. We need to rethink a lot of what the internet is. And fortunately, we have some idea of where that solution could come from. And it comes from the early internet itself. And this is the WebIT version of it. I have an entire talk on this slide, but I'll give you the condensed version that goes something like this. The architecture of the internet did something very interesting. It replaced and introduced something that was entirely unlike anything a network had seen before, when it replaced the centralized architecture of the phone network, which was ubiquitous, but tightly controlled, with a distributed architecture that is the internet. And that, of course, unleashed all kinds of innovation and capability. By putting the power at the edge of the network, it gave entrepreneurs and entire ecosystems the opportunity to create value where you could never have done that in a centralized, controlled phone network. And that early example of what the internet could do, I think, begins to hint at what the future might hold. And you say the future, well, why isn't the internet like that now? And I think it's actually a bit of an irony that if you think about everything you do on the internet today, it has evolved over time. And for reasons, some good, some bad, almost everything from the cloud to social networking to search, with the sole exception of the users who raise their hands as uTorrent users, all of those applications look more like the phone network, if you think about it. They're all centralized, or maybe at best decentralized, a dizzying array of data centers. And centralized architectures, while good in many ways, do bring with them some downsides. They're slow, they're not terribly efficient. Of course, anytime you create a centralized point of control, you create a bottleneck by design. And if you think about how many times you've seen failure on the internet, you know what I mean. Like the file that you're waiting to get from the internet, and it's like 99% there over FTP, and then the link fails. You got to start all over again. Those are the kinds of things that come with centralized architectures. But if somebody who's used BitTorrent, in contrast to, say, the web or FTP, you know that this is a very resilient protocol. It recovers nicely from these failures. It's very fault tolerant. And this is one of the characteristics that's going to be absolutely required as we bring many, many new devices to the internet and connect them with maybe less than reliable network connectivity. And of course, if you're moving big data to or from a lot of locations and you're using some traditional tools like rsync, we have a capability in BitTorrent Sync that, again, leverages all the benefits of distributed architectures to do the exact same job, but in a fast, efficient, fault-tolerant manner. So we built BitTorrent Sync, and I don't know how many of you know BitTorrent Sync, but it was built as a consumer and small business startup kind of tool that essentially recreates what Dropbox built, but without the public cloud. Again, completely distributed. And it doesn't have any of the privacy concerns of the public cloud. It doesn't have any of the scalability concerns of the private cloud. And it doesn't have any of the speed issues that the private cloud has. For anybody who's tried to upload something to Dropbox, and you're waiting eternally, maybe except in Bulgaria where the internet's fast, you know what I mean. And we wanted to take this capability and put it into the hands of an IT administrator. So we created Sync IT, which is basically the exact same technology, leveraging all the benefits of distributed technology to deliver any size data, big data, the bigger the better, to anywhere in the world. We are a global network, and over any kind of network. Whether that network is fat or thin, good or bad, it doesn't matter. And it brings all of the benefits of distributed architectures that I've just talked about. It's fast, it's efficient, it's scalable, it's very resilient, it's secure, it's private. These are all good things if you are a startup or a business trying to create value on the internet. And some of the problems that we believe these distributed technologies, not just Sync IT, but any distributed technology can solve are maybe things like large file transfers, where I want to get big data from one place to another place. This might be like media post-processing. This might be an agency that needs to get raw image files to all of my clients. And you want to use all of the network that you have. You have 100 megabits here in Bulgaria. You want to use every bit of it. But if those destinations are far away, the delayed bandwidth product says you cannot use it all. And you find that you're underutilizing this great resource that you have. You want to fix that. And today, the only way you can really solve it is to buy expensive WAN acceleration gear, like maybe an Aspera or something like that, put a box in all these locations, and yeah, you can solve it. But this software solution can be deployed anywhere, even in clients that may come and go, and gives you the exact same thing at a far more affordable cost. Or you might be an administrator who's trying to get big data to and from a lot of retail locations, like I hinted at in the quiz. Maybe it's fast food chains in Europe or China, or maybe it's remote learning facilities, or maybe it's university satellite campuses. These tend to have very thin pipes into the location and a big fat LAN once you're there. And you want to get a lot of data to a lot of machines in those places. The wonderful thing about distributed technologies is that the machines on the LAN can replicate to each other, and you only need to get one copy in to one machine, and it's very, very efficient. Centralized approaches would pound that thin pipe with every copy to every machine, and that just simply will not work. Especially when you think about emerging IoT applications, which I think are the most exciting, at least for me. And we have seen people embed BitTorrent Sync and even uTorrent in things that we would never have imagined. Take body cams and dash cams on police cruisers who take a lot of video, but they only offload and sync that video once they get back to a Wi-Fi connection in the police station. Or maybe it's a logistics company that has data on every shipping container that, again, only syncs that data once the ship is back in port. Or a drone that only syncs the video off the drone when it lands and is connected to Wi-Fi. These are all emerging views of what the IoT ecosystem will look like. These are the challenges that the IoT ecosystem will face. Very unreliable networks, very intermittent networks, and yet many, many devices that may need to move a lot of data. And we think these are wonderful applications for distributed technology. But whatever your use case may be, and as a startup, I'm sure you're thinking about how I can use this distributed technology to move big data anywhere in the world and power my business. I'm sure your imaginations are vastly more capable than my limited view of this world. And I no doubt hope that when you are faced with your next technical challenge, you will choose the only viable solution for the future of the internet, and that is a distributed solution, maybe uTorrent, maybe BitTorrent Sync. And with that, I thank you very, very much.